Good morning, Myra. How are you today?
Oh, very good. Thank you. It's good to be here
Wonderful.
with you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is Noreen with the Healthy Peaceful Podcast, just welcoming both viewers and listeners. And today I have a wonderful guest, Myra Lewin. And your business name, I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, Hale Pule.
That's
Is that
correct.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well
And I'm
done.
just wonderful. And I'm just going to take a moment to highlight some details in your bio. Myra is an Ayurvedic practitioner, and she's a yoga therapist. She's a professional member of NAMA, the National Ayurvedic Medical Association. She has been teaching yoga for over 30 years. She has two books, one of which we're going to be touching on today, Freedom in Your Relationship with Food, and the other one is a cookbook, Simple Ayurvedic Recipes. She has two beautiful podcasts. One is called Everyday Ayurveda and Yoga at Hale Pule, and the other is wonderful for listening to on a daily basis to spark your intuition.
Mhm.
Wonderful. So we're going to jump right in. Was there anything that I should add to your bio that is happening now? And
No, I think that's great. I think we've been working online for a good while, and now we are a little more until we
sure,
can do in-person programs again as well.
of course, of course.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump right in.
Okay.
Um, I know you have a book. It's called that I was very interested in, called titled "Freedom in Your Relationship with Food." Um, and what I like about this is there's no reference in the title to eating disorders,
Yeah.
which sometimes can be quite off-putting.
Yeah.
Um, because my feeling is that in some way we all have areas of in our relationship with food where freedom isn't exhibited, even if it doesn't rise to the level of disordered eating.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
could could you comment on that from an Ayurvedic perspective?
Yes, for sure. Um, you know, I'll start at the beginning.
Sure.
Consider that our relationship with food is very much about our relationship with Mother. And so that would be Mother Earth and perhaps our birth mother also, and how that starts out. Because, and so there's a couple of things that happen. Number one is our society, we've gotten away from what's natural in relationship with food. It's become kind of mechanical and just get it done, and it's just to fix things. And from an Ayurveda standpoint, food is about it's our nourishment, and we need to be able to digest it. And so those are things that most of us have never considered before. And so that relationship then is about our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with all of nature, because it's the most important thing. Yeah.
Mm,
That really
yeah.
are because if we don't have a relationship with ourselves, we're not likely to be true to ourselves. And a lot of people these days, are starting to see more of that, especially with spending more time alone or spending more time at home, and maybe in some cases doing less. And so then we start to see how we use food in inappropriate ways. You know, our our meals are really meant to be they're meant to be delightful for us. There's something that can make us that it should feel good. Yeah, but it also shouldn't be exciting. It shouldn't be torturous. There's all the things in between. And you know, and many people, and myself included earlier in my life, we spend way too much time thinking about it. Thinking about
Mm,
when is it going to happen again? What am I going to have? Is there going to be enough? And that's another one thing that many people deal with, is that it's this feeling that there might not be enough. And
mm,
so again, to some degree it's about the food, but mostly it's not about the food. It's about our relationship with ourselves.
mm-hmm. Yes, okay. That's wonderful. And since 2009, at the time that you wrote this book, has anything changed in the way that you think about how have you evolved or evolved the way that you work with clients
Mm.
in terms of connecting the relationship with self and bringing
Mhm.
it further into relationship with food in terms of healing?
Yes.
And maybe just a couple of things that you could tell me what's changed for you during this period of time, this decade.
Hmm. Yeah, actually, quite a bit has
Yeah,
in the way I work with clients and that.
sure.
And I think that the first piece of that is when I wrote the book, Ayurveda was quite new to many people. It was people still couldn't quite spell it, and
Sure.
and so I wanted to give some basis for it. But I knew also at that time if I went too far with it that I would lose people. So that dictated how I put the book together. As people have become more interested, I've been able to go more deeply into the principles of Ayurveda. In the
Mm,
beginning, most of us we can only handle so much
sure.
because it's such a different way of looking at things.
Mm,
So, even in the book, I talk about doshas, vata, pitta, kapha, and the characteristics and those kinds of things, and that's all very important, but there's so many other pieces to it that
mm,
bring the whole system together,
hmm.
that make it functional and have it be a way that we can understand it in terms of how our body functions. But the other thing that I've really come to emphasize, and really because of how my clients are approaching me, yeah, and what I'm seeing in the trend, because in the last 10 years or 11 years, there's a huge change
Mm-hmm.
in what I'm seeing that are people are having problems with. We have a lot more vata provocation, meaning people are much more fearful and anxious and not as connected to their bodies. But also in that time frame, we have a whole nother generation of people, people that are in their 30s now, who really, they're coming into it, perhaps a little bit younger than than previously, and but that is happening because people are having problems. So there's a lot
Mm,
more health problems that are prominent and that get exacerbated by our relationship with food.
mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah,
so so then I talk about things, I because that of the presence of more disease, illness and disease, then I talk about things in much more in relation to that and how the mind ties in with that.
mm, yeah. That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. So it sounds like you've seen in the last decade that Ayurveda has grown exponentially and that you've been able to incorporate more of, for instance, Sanskrit language and things that seem foreign and not really approachable. You've been able to weave those in more fully in your work,
Yes.
and it's not quite as off-putting as perhaps it was.
Right, right. And I don't use as much Sanskrit as a lot of other people. And there's part of me that would really like to, but I
Sure,
also keep in my mind that my most important goal is that I communicate.
sure,
And so my goal is to have people have a better understanding of how their body and mind and spirit function together.
sure,
And
sure.
yeah, so
Yeah,
these days we many people tend to we move. People will say, "Oh, I'm having these problems, and I just can't understand why because I was really eating well. But oh, by the way, I moved last month, and and my dog died, or and all these things happened, and we just have to recognize how much that affects our ability to digest food because our digesting life might be fairly challenged."
sure, sure.
Yeah.
That's many times there isn't the impetus to for people to connect what's happening in their life to what's happening in their
Mhm.
body. So there's definitely can be that disconnect, no
Yes.
doubt.
Yeah.
Um, and the other point that you raised was that you've noticed that vata provocation, just because of the nervous system, I believe, can sometimes increase as we age. But you,
Definitely. Yeah.
but you've indicated that you're really seeing, and maybe for our viewers and listeners, you can just describe what you mean when you say vata provocation, and that it's happening to people in their 30s and at younger ages. And a follow-up question to that is, what do you attribute that to? So first, just describe briefly what vata provocation is from an Ayurvedic perspective, and then why it's
Mhm.
happening so
Mhm.
young in life.
Yes. Yeah. It is natural that vata would increase as we age because the body is drying up, and vata is has the qualities of being light, dry, and airy, and it's mobile. It means it is responsible for all of the movement in the body, including our heartbeat, for example. And so vata is air and ethers. So, if you've ever had too much air in you, then you have gas, or you might have some burping and that. But, and the ethers is space. So, for example, when a woman births a baby, there's a space that's created once the baby has come out.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very important to reduce that as soon as possible, so that mom can stay more balanced. Because when vata is in excess in us, meaning there are too much air and ethers in us, then we become scattered, we become fearful, anxious, we start drying up, we get constipated. There's a big long list.
Mm-hmm.
And vata is the most powerful of the doshas, but we all have all three,
Mm-hmm.
involving fire and water and earth as well,
Mm-hmm.
pitta and kapha. And so these, so vata then it goes up, as do any of the doshas, when we do things that match the qualities of it. So we have this principle, like attracts like, and opposite quality brings balance. So, for example, if I do a lot of traveling and I'm flying in airplanes and driving in cars and moving around all the time, then we tend to get feeling pretty scattered, right? That will happen to any of us, and that's because you've been in the air, right?
Mm.
And then if I go and eat cold food and crackers, for
Right,
example, all
right.
light, dry, airy things,
Mm.
then and cold is also one of the qualities of vata, then it's going to increase the vata in me. So
Mm.
if I want to bring the opposite, excuse me, if I want to bring balance, then I bring in the opposite qualities.
Mm.
So if I'm feeling cold and scattered, a little anxious, and not real grounded, then I need warm cooked foods. I need activities and things that are not moving constantly, things like that. So we work with these opposite qualities that are present in nature, and that's how we bring balance. So that dosha, then, why are we seeing so much more of it? Well, travel is one thing. I mean, until the early 2020, there was a lot of travel happening around the world,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people under the age of 30, especially, have been traveling. I frequently talk to people who, oh yeah, I traveled the last 2 years. 2 years of
Sure.
travel will aggravate vata in most anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But the other reasons would be because we're sitting and using electronics a lot more, because
Sure.
the image on the screen is created by flickering lights. And so
Mm.
that movement then has a stimulation on the nervous system.
Mm.
So vata is, vata and kapha, but our vata is responsible for how the nervous system functions.
Mm. Yeah.
And that's one of
Beautiful.
the big differences in Ayurveda that's so important, is that we don't look at what has happened. In other words, we don't look and say, oh, the liver has damage or the liver has congestion. We look at how are things functioning and how can we optimize this and make that function proper. And
Mm,
so that's, the two most powerful ways to do that is with your food and your lifestyle. And part of that lifestyle is being able to digest life.
sure, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. That's wonderful. Um, in your in your book, you talk about cultivating a new awareness, really in your life, and
Mhm.
that when you are able to do that, then essentially you're crowding out your cravings or addictions, which one of them can obviously be food related,
Mhm.
but it could be other things as well. You start to trust yourself, and by trusting yourself, you cultivate or you practice more patience and acceptance with others.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, could you talk about awareness and becoming conscious, becoming a conscious eater, living more consciously, and how that will help with healing and just really living a joyful life, optimum health, and your relationship with food?
Mhm. Okay. Yes. To really optimize your relationship with food, as I said before, is that it goes back to your relationship with yourself, and that really starts with some degree of self-awareness. As you mentioned, a lot of folks don't pay attention to the notion of cause and effect, meaning the actions I take create some results in me. So that if I'm not getting enough sleep, for example, then my Agni, which is the digestive fire for digesting food and life that's in each of us, will get weak if we don't use it properly, if we snack and eat too often, if we eat at night. Those are things that all disturb that Agni. Getting angry disturbs our Agni. And so our ability then to digest is directly connected to how we feel. But if we're always moving quickly, for example, and not paying attention to how we feel, then we don't make that connection. So that awareness that I'm speaking of is that first step. Ah, I do these things and I get this result. But I have to look at the whole picture. We've been trained uh, to look at the food as the problem.
Yeah,
Oh, I don't, oh, that food isn't good for me, you know.
sure.
But it's really not about the food. It's about
Mm,
how we eat.
mm,
And that's one of the things that happened that when I was putting that book together was I started watching people eating and realized that most people don't chew more than 3 times. And and
yeah, yeah. That
I went around and did quite a bit of research,
yeah, I
actually.
saw that in your book. You recommended trying to chew 20 times.
And at this point, what I want to say about it is
Maybe
that
maybe that's shifted for you.
it has actually
Yeah,
because of different types of food.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that a better way to say it is that we shouldn't swallow anything solid, and we need to mix it with our saliva,
Mm,
because if it doesn't mix with your saliva, then you won't digest it.
sure. Yeah.
So, so that means a liquid, it needs to be in your mouth just a short time, but it needs to be there a little bit, not just throwing down a smoothie or something like that.
Sure.
And then some things, they're going to take a little while to chew, maybe more than 20 chews. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Um, I actually my first podcast interview was with Lino Stanchich, who wrote the book Power Eating Program
Mhm.
about chewing, how chewing changes your life.
Yeah, I've had many clients who just getting them to chew and be a little bit more conscious while eating, and their sleep improves, their elimination
Sure.
improves. I mean, everything is connected.
Yes, and you made the point that digestion begins as soon as you put food in the mouth. It's not, and the by chewing, would you say you're pre-digesting your food, or
Yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah.
enhanced? Okay,
Yeah, I mean, and you could also say that about when we cook the food, we've started that process, but
sure,
then that first step is in the mouth. And if that doesn't, like I said, if it doesn't take place properly, it's not going to get digested well. It's not going to feel good.
sure. Do
Yeah.
you find that clients are skeptical when you review the benefits of chewing?
Um, I think most clients are embarrassed that we're having to have this conversation,
Yeah,
because it makes sense. And that's one of the big things in Ayurveda, is that you'll find yourself as you dive into it and start to observe yourself and increase your self-awareness, that it makes sense. It just makes sense. It's not actually that complicated. It's just very different than what we're used to.
sure, sure. It almost seems overly simple, um,
Mhm.
you know.
Nature is quite simple. It is our minds that are not simple.
Is how true, how true. So in cultivating a greater awareness, both in your relationship with yourself and food, chewing, just observing, um, paying attention, chewing. Are there any other tools or things that people can, practical things that people can start to cultivate that? Because, they, real things that they can bring into their life. Chewing's a big one. I totally
It is a
concur
big
with
one.
that. Yeah.
The other one that really helps is to sit down to a meal, to sit down, and
The
and
operative word, sit down.
yes, with no distractions. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so no phone, no TV, no reading, none of that,
Mm-hmm.
and just focus on the meal. But before you start, saying a prayer. Some people like to chant a mantra, or even if you just take 3 relaxing breaths. Yeah, because what that does is it starts to soften up the cells. And when we're tense or we're moving quickly through life, and that, then the cells of our body constrict. And each of the cells has an agni, it has a digestive fire.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd like those to be available and operating. And so just a few really relaxing breaths, and then start eating.
Mm, that's
But some
beautiful.
kind of acknowledgement is really important. So we bring a sacred nature back to it, to the process, and that helps to elevate its importance in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. It's beautiful. I know Ayurveda really emphasizes the importance of establishing a daily routine.
Mhm. Mhm.
Do you find that's challenging with your clients in terms of meals? Or how can that be incorporated into mealtime in a way
Okay.
that makes sense? I mean, there's obviously people are living different lifestyles, but
Mhm.
most don't have a lot of time to dedicate to cooking.
Mhm. But when you talk about a daily routine, it's called dinacharya in Sanskrit.
Okay.
But that dinacharya is, we all have one.
Mm. Right, right.
It's just it. It's a matter of what it is.
Sure,
So
sure.
so we just encourage people to do things regularly. So back to our friend Vata. In order to keep Vata calm, the two most important things are regular schedule of eating and sleeping.
Okay.
And so we really encourage the regular meal times, because not only that related to Vata, but also related to Agni, or the digestive fire. It's just like a campfire. If
Mm.
you give it some fuel, poke it a little bit, give it some air, then it will burn and it will get bigger. And if you throw dirt on it, it will smolder, right?
Mm.
It won't be as strong, and it'll smoke and not burn as cleanly. So that's what happens inside of us. And so when I'm self-aware, when I take the time to sit down and allow myself to be present for the meal, these are all things that support Agni. When
Mm.
I don't eat regularly,
Mm.
for example, I skip breakfast or I eat dinner really late at night, or I snack all day. Those are all things that insult our Agni. It's like throwing dirt on it, and then it doesn't work that well. And this is a really important point for people to understand, because many problems come as a result of this. And if we don't understand and take care of Agni, then we get sick.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know that Agni, the digestive fire, is a key component, or maybe it's not a key, it's the key component in terms of digesting well and then being able to assimilate
Mhm.
nutrients
Mhm.
and really being at your optimum. Um, I know there's not, Ayurveda doesn't advocate a one size fits all approach, but are there some things that people can think about in terms of maintaining a healthy Agni
Oh, yes.
in the winter time, particularly in the winter season that we're in right now?
Yes. And in the winter, because Agni is a fire in us,
Mm.
and it's what creates the light in our eyes.
Mm.
Right? If you've ever seen someone who's been ill, for example, and the eyes look kind of dull, it's
Yeah,
because the Agni is weak usually.
sure, sure.
But things to do to keep Agni strong are the things that I mentioned, which is, well, let me put it a different way. Uh, to have 3 meals in the day, regular times, and not snack and not eat at night, and have a positive attitude, have a positive, open attitude. And those are great ways to take care of your Agni. And because those are things that if you just shift things,
Sure.
then it will you'll feel better in a very short time, usually even in days. And so, of course, these things have very much to do with our relationship with food,
Sure.
coming back around to that, because especially the snacking thing,
Mm.
uh, because snacking came about for all the wrong reasons. It came about in the 1970s and early 80s, uh, as a response to junk food and fast food that had come around, and it's not a proper solution.
Mm.
It has caused people very big problems. Yeah, but the commercial food industry really liked it.
Sure, sure. And I know that, let's take snacking as an example, but any habit that you want to change, um, a client wants to change, or
Mhm.
such as snacking, is change, do you recommend incremental change, or is it just one of those, or, how do you usually transition clients into a healthier, creating a healthier habit?
Right. Well, in the example of snacking,
Mm.
uh, sometimes some people I'll just say, okay, eat breakfast and stop snacking, because
Right,
they're not
right.
eating breakfast or something like that.
Sure.
Uh, and once they understand that they're not hungry at breakfast because they've been snacking the previous day, but then there's things that we can do. For example, you can have something called a ginger appetizer. It's just a little tiny bit of fresh ginger with a tiny bit of salt and a tiny bit of lime or lemon, and that'll help stimulate Agni. This helps
Mm.
to stimulate appetite.
Hmm.
But then, uh, additionally, where did I go there? Uh,
We were just
where were we? Sorry.
we were touching base on in working with a client, and if one of the things that they want to change, that you recommend that they consider changing is snacking, how do they move toward a healthier habit?
Right. Okay. So, so once, so with some people though, I would say, okay, well, rather than having 4 snacks in the day, then let's go take it down to 1. Sometimes I have to say, okay, 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. But I also emphasize to them that, that if you're having digestive problems, they're going to get better a lot faster the more you reduce that. Yeah.
Sure,
So I try to get people to go to 1 time in the day
sure.
first.
Okay. So so it can be incremental depending on how entrenched the habit is.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Um,
And especially people who do a lot of physical work or and things like that, they feel like they need it, but actually once Agni is working better, they actually will be stronger and have more energy.
yes, and maybe more mental fortitude to not, it'll no longer be attractive.
Right. Now, there's another reason that we want to do that, which is the emotions. These are feelings that start to come up that we don't want to deal with. And
Of course.
so we distract ourselves by eating, sometimes doing other things. Um, and and eating, like I said in the beginning, that it should be delightful.
Sure.
The tastes are wonderful, the textures, there's all kinds of reasons to that it's so wonderful for our 5 senses, our 5 sense organs,
Of course.
of sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell, right?
Yes.
Because those are the things, that's how we experience our outer world.
Of course. Well, I think it's beautiful um, if people can move toward realizing that um, they are going to not only be properly nourished but experience delight.
Hmm. Yeah.
uh, which we don't want nourishment to be about to be droll or dull or we really do want it to be delightful and
Yeah.
blissful, and
Yeah.
I think that can be very encouraging when people start moving in that direction.
Another
um,
thing people could do too is that their eating environment,
mm,
if it could have the environment be quiet and calm. Yeah, and for some people it's a really good idea to not talk while they eat. But if you do, just to pay attention, do you start speeding up, or do you lose awareness of the last bite because you were talking so much? And so those are some other things that people can pay attention to, and just give it a little bit of attention, and try to eat in places that are not too noisy.
sure, absolutely. um, I know in your book, and even in doing some reading recently on disordered eating, and I don't even like that term, but it's used in a lot of Western literature.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, you really indicate that it is the food, but it's not the food.
Yeah.
It's everything starts in the mind, and I know you refer, and actually that's very much in line with the Western approach as well. That it's many eating disorders will be related to control.
Hmm.
And I know you reference the word surrender quite a bit in your book and in your work.
Hmm.
Could you comment on that about how those words, control and moving toward a place of surrender, healthy of course, how that's it's really instrumental in healing your relationship with food?
Hmm. Yes, it is. Because in most cases, there is there's some illusion about what we can control. And this is something that actually in the yogic teachings is discussed, and we get into something called avidya, which is illusion or delusion. In
Mm-hmm.
other words, we have the illusion, and it comes about for lots of different reasons, that we can control things that we can't control. For example, other people, our environment, and that. And we have experiences previously in this life, perhaps past lives, where we may have been compromised in some way, or some difficulties, which then, rather than being able to process that experience fully, we hang on to it, and then we attempt to control things that we can't control. And so when that comes up, and we start to hit that wall of illusion, then we need to do something to feel better, because it feels really uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good. And that's that, what we call emotional eating. It's like, oh, there's that feeling. A lot of times, though, people are not aware that they're doing it. I mean, they're aware once they're eating emotionally. Most people will start to recognize, oh, I overate, or I'm restricting, or whatever. Sometimes people are under eating. And so, we can recognize we're taking that action, but then we encourage people to start backing up in the process, and let's find out what's the root cause of what's happening. And it's discomfort about something,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's we feel inadequate in a situation, or we're seeing the world through a previous experience in life,
Mm-hmm.
which is not related to the present at all.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
and uh, so what happens then is that as we start to cultivate more self-awareness and our sense of our spiritual self, then we can start to turn away from that old one, and replace it with not just spiritual practice, but what we call shraddha, to recognize, what is my real faith? What do I really want to do? And what kind of action do I really take? Am I willing to, for example, trust the process of life? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because we all have boo-boos in our background.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and all of
uh,
us
yeah,
can
I think Ayurveda refers to those as samskaras, or
samskara.
or impression. I think that another word I've seen used is impression.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Although impression could be misconstrued. I like boo boo. Yeah, that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they
Because
don't necessarily go away quickly.
yeah, that's right. They don't. Sometimes they don't, because sometimes it's a part of us that just doesn't want to let go. And it brings us back to then surrender. So that's what we're talking about, is that we're surrendering some of those old impressions. And that's where our intuitive energy practice, where we work with clearing the charge off of those old impressions or memories. They're memories, and they become habits of thinking, you see. And so when you want to replace a habit, it's pretty simple. You have to, or excuse me, when you want to change a habit, you have to be willing to let go of the one, and then willing to replace it with something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
The only
beautiful.
thing is that a lot of times today, people, if they've had problems with overeating, for example, then they want to replace it with over exercising, which is not a good answer.
Well, you bring up a very good point, because I think, even if the habit doesn't, even if the person doesn't feel that the habit rises to a level, is at the level of to be called an addiction,
Hmm.
frequently, you know, uh, I mean, I've even seen people, for instance, who have really been very high chargers in a corporate world,
Hmm.
and then shift into a more spiritual, we'll just use the word, a more spiritual profession, but
Hmm.
they're still approaching it from that, in that
Yeah.
high charged way, so it's, how do you, what are some, for someone who's, really struggling with changing these habits and surrendering control.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, from an Ayurvedic perspective, where do they start?
Huh. Well, we start with a couple of the small things that we've talked about, but that
Yeah,
are big, which is
sure,
chewing. And we
sure.
could start because what that does is it starts to demonstrate cause and effect. So
Yes,
that's
yes,
a little thing, but
sure.
it's an important one. And
Mm,
then the next thing is to start um, to have a breathing practice and a meditation practice.
mm,
So they're things that help us increase our self-awareness, connect to our higher self. And it can be very small. The whole thing can be 3 minutes long to start with.
mm-hmm,
But for example, we teach people something called the take pause exercise, which
mm-hmm,
is to stop 3 times in the day. You can set your alarm and you just stop and you take 12 slow, conscious, deep breaths.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of a tall order for a lot of us in the beginning. But if you do that, and then you smile to yourself. Yeah, because what we're doing then is that we're making softer, sweeter impressions that we can start to operate from those impressions
Oh,
instead of
that's
the past.
beautiful. I love the words that you use, softer, sweeter.
Yeah, it's something I think we need more of with ourselves and with people in today. Soft and sweet. We like soft and sweet food too, most of us.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Exactly. Wonderful. Let's just see if there's anything else from your book. Okay. Yeah, I know you touched on this, but food obsession and eating may be your primary choice of dealing with feelings
Mhm.
and suppressed emotions. Um, how does Ayurveda um, look at, you know, um, letting these emotions come to the surface, and if
Mhm.
someone's working or struggling with their relationship with food, how can they integrate both a Western perspective and Ayurveda in
Mm,
turn?
okay. Well, from a food standpoint, I would say they don't integrate. Uh,
Okay,
it's a completely different approach. But from the standpoint of the mind, uh, the idea that I think what Ayurveda does is it just goes a step farther. Uh,
sure.
so, for example, in Western psychology, we talk about things, we become aware of things, but sometimes there's not another step to really actually allow that energy to move. So, how we look at it in Ayurveda is that you know health and healing takes place, and um, we're at our optimum and we feel the best when prana, our life force, is moving. And
Sure.
it naturally moves and it should move through our body. So when we do that, we don't have pain.
Mm,
And so when things block that, let's say I'm resentful at my parents, and I'm hanging on to things from the past. That's
mm,
going to create a blockage of prana, of life force.
mm,
And because it doesn't feel good, we start trying to do things to make ourselves feel better. One of those
mm,
things that we do, many people, is to eat too much,
mm,
or to become obsessed with eating as a way of escaping.
mm,
And so that's just one example, but it could be anything that we don't want to feel. And really, as human beings, we often don't want to feel things because we don't know what to do with it. And so, from an Ayurveda standpoint, we understand it as a movement of prana.
mm,
So we do things, we work with the breath, especially, and we work with the mind in guided meditations, in having body work done, and things of that nature, where we start to move the prana, and then we have healing.
beautiful. And I know you have a program that you run. You're in New Zealand, I believe. Well, I
I'm
should
having a hard
say,
time answering that question right now, actually.
uh,
I
you,
should be in New Zealand, but
or
I'm not.
you were in Hawaii and then in New Zealand, but you should be in
Correct.
New Zealand. Okay. Um, well, in some ways, your location is not relevant at the moment.
At the moment, it's not. Yes. Hmm.
But you have a program at Hale Pule. Well, before I ask that, what is the meaning of Hale Pule?
Yes. Okay. Hale Pule is Hawaiian for house of prayer.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's
Yes.
beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
And you were formerly in Hawaii. You lived in Hawaii, I believe, for
20
a number of
years. Yeah.
yes,
It was,
yes.
Hale Pule was started in 1999.
Beautiful, beautiful. Um, Hale Pule, you offer a number of programs. One that's intriguing to me is you have, I believe, a 2-week program, Ayurvedic cooking, or it's a professional program? I don't recall if it's a professional certification or um, accessible for people who want to
Uh-huh.
institute personal change. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that program.
Yeah, our chef training is a professional program, 2 weeks in person.
Okay,
And we're just in the process of making an online version of that we'll expect to have in September, October timeframe.
sure.
And but it's also something that if someone who's really interested in going deeper in Ayurveda, then how it'll be online, it probably will be 10 days rather than 2 weeks. And people do pre-work. So it's something that does go quite deeply into the principles of Ayurveda and understanding the cooking and not only how to cook, but also the effects of the food and that. We also have we've just done a very simple little course, simple Ayurvedic cooking recently. That's just for people getting started. So it just goes through a
Oh,
few meals.
that's
And
great. Is that a 1 day course or a couple of days or?
it's a couple of days. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, that's a great idea. It's a great
Yeah.
idea. Um, and it's commonly misconstrued that the approach to Ayurvedic cooking and Ayurvedic cuisine is Indian. Um, my understanding is that it can be applied to any ethnic cuisine.
Hmm.
It does use quite a lot of spices which are associated with Indian cuisine.
Hmm.
Um, any
But
comments regarding that, or how to address that with clients who
right.
they don't necessarily want to, they want to continue with their own the
Hmm.
foods that they enjoy, but um, move toward an Ayurvedic way of preparing and thinking about them.
Right. And that's where we approach it quite differently than a lot of people, because we approach it from the standpoint of bringing balance to our system, to
Okay,
take care of Agni and
sure,
to bring balance to the doshas,
sure,
which will bring balance in your system and have prana, the life force, move through you. So we emphasize a tridoshic meal, and that so that there's no rigid rules about this, and spices and herbs from anywhere in the world can be used, because we look at the principles, and we look at
sure,
the qualities that are present in those herbs and spices, because the reason we use herbs and spices is to support digestion. That's first thing, is to support the digestion.
hmm
Sometimes it's to bring the balance to the meal if it needs another quality that's not present. And if you do both of those things, then you get the third reason, which is taste.
mm,
So the cooking should not have any one taste stand out. There are 6 tastes, and those 6 tastes, they become friends in the cooking process when there's an appropriate amount of each of them.
hmm
And that's one of the main things that we teach, because when we get out of balance, our tendency will be to use too much of one taste. And this causes more imbalance, of course. And there's a
sure,
lot of that going on these days,
of
uh,
course,
because of the linear approach, to food, where it just seems like, oh, somebody said this is good for me, so I'm going to put more of it on there. and that's really not a good idea. But the other thing that comes with Ayurvedic principles, again, many spices from anywhere in the world, or herbs, and you don't need a lot. I really encourage people to work with 3 to start with, and that's plenty.
Sure.
Um, but the other thing, where did it go? We're in the hot time of day.
No, that's okay. We were talking about
Mm.
I think one of the things I thought was interesting in your book, and it relates to what you're saying, is we were talking about how Ayurveda applies to any cuisine, and it's a misconception that it's Indian food.
Okay. Yeah.
But actually, your point about, you encourage people with spices, start small.
Hmm.
And that also, when they're introducing spices for healing and for stimulating Agni, which
Hmm.
is the key component in Ayurveda, um, they don't necessarily have to use a lot of spice. It's just a little bit goes a long way.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I liked in your book, it relates to that somewhat, but you said that, um, you know, many times we have, especially in the US, of course, we've got fusion cuisine and we've got such a variety of food, but
Yeah.
all of these different types of food sometimes there can be too much on the plate, too many things going on.
Hmm.
And you suggested three or four dishes. I
Right.
think you I think you said 4 dishes, and I really
Or
like I really like that because it's just introducing simplicity, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think will really help with digestion.
absolutely, yes. That's exactly right. Our Agni really appreciates it, keeping things
Yeah,
simple.
because if we're drinking a smoothie and we're having an egg roll and it's just like
Yeah.
too many things happening, you know, and um, and
And
I
one
view
of the
I,
other
I view
things.
food as an alchemy as well,
Mhm.
and cooking as an alchemy. I don't so much
Mhm.
of what you're saying reminds me of that word that, in the kitchen you're an alchemist, but start
Yes.
small, start small.
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to say about that is that when you have those 6 tastes in a meal, then you're satiated afterwards, meaning you're satisfied.
Beautiful.
That's one of the key things for people who are moving away from snacking, is
Oh
that
yeah,
if they can get the 6 tastes into the meal,
sure.
then it makes it much easier because they'll say, "Oh, I just don't think I can make it to lunch." But then they find out that, "Oh, I'm okay. I'm satisfied."
And they feel great. I mean, that's been my experience in
Hmm.
incorporating that.
Yeah.
Beautiful,
True.
beautiful. You also have a program which is I know I don't have I probably have the incorrect title, but it relates to Agni, and it sounds like it's a 21-day
Mhm.
reset.
Yes, it's
Um,
Agni
t-
therapy.
yeah, to tell me about that program and who might be an appropriate participant in that program.
Right. Well, it's a 21-day program. You can also extend it if you'd like. Some people like to do that because
Sure.
the first week is learning about the foundations and giving you a dinacharya, a daily routine. And you can take a small piece of it, or you can take the whole thing, and then you can also come back later and do it again. So so then that second week is just a very gentle cleanse, and then the third week is integrating, keeping the things that you've learned all along in practice, and then having regular meals and putting these principles into practice. And that second week is one of the things that helps Agni to be able to reset. And so
Mm.
that's and because many times it's there's all these things that we've been doing, like not chewing or snacking and things of that nature, that have been disturbing Agni. And as soon as we move away from that, Agni comes right back.
Mm.
It's our life force. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Beautiful.
And so
That's
it's a lot of fun because people get great results. So
Oh yeah. Well, it sounds like that particular program would be good for anyone.
it would be good for any. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. And you're starting a new program, my understanding is, on it relates
Healing your
to,
relationship with food. Yeah.
oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
As I indicated earlier, I love the fact that you're not including disordered eating in the title or
Hmm.
um,
Yeah. We did
addictions.
deliberate about that, I will
Yeah,
say.
yeah, I'm
We
glad.
went back and forth, and I just said, no, I cannot do that. I think this is our approach, so we need to keep it, keep the title in that manner.
I
So
like it much better. Describe when does that, first of all, when does that course, when is the
uh,
next?
end of February, and
Okay,
it's a 12-week course, and it's there's not huge requirements except that there's consistent requirements through each week.
I
So in
see.
other words, it's not many hours of video and things like that. There are some though.
Hmm.
And in the beginning of it, we're instilling some of the practices similar to what's in Agni therapy.
Hmm.
And we really, people who take Agni therapy first, I think will have um, a nice jump on things, you might say.
Sure.
So what we're dealing with though through those 12 weeks is a lot of what's going on with the mind and our relationship with food and having that sort of develop over time.
That's
Yeah,
great. Well, that sounds very experiential. So
it is.
I look forward to seeing how that evolves. It sounds like a wonderful program. And yeah, that's great. Um, maybe when a client comes to you, or I'm sure you've heard in discussions with people, you touch on it a little bit already. Something's, why should I do that? It's not good for me.
Mm-hmm.
Or somebody is very knowledgeable of nutrition,
Mm-hmm.
and they might be putting things through a nutrition program and making sure that they've received all their nutrients, but there's still maybe they still have some conditions that they're grappling with, like high cholesterol or
Yeah.
is there a way to ease into that discussion without, because sometimes you hit a wall,
Mm-hmm.
um, and maybe so do you have any suggestions for I mean, if someone comes to you and they're coming to you as a client, I'm going to assume that there's a willingness to consider another approach, but maybe you've encountered people, even clients, who are it's difficult for them to entertain another way of looking at the problem.
Right. Right. I most of the time people do have a little bit of openness, in which case that's where I focus.
Sure. Oh,
Just,
okay. You're
what
fine.
area is going to get their attention, and then
Okay.
let them experience that.
All right.
Then they start to become more open. But if
Okay.
somebody is really attached to that modern medical perspective,
Sure.
um, I usually encourage them to go do that. And
Okay.
in other words, do whatever you believe in, because what we believe in is where our energy is going.
That's
And
true.
so
Yeah,
if you
it's
believe in
beautiful.
that, yeah, because scattering ourselves is also really not a good idea. Yeah. And so I have
Absolutely.
had clients, a few, where I just said, I think maybe you should go do that. Or
Sure.
I've had people referred to me, because they've been diagnosed with cancer.
Sure.
And we have very good solutions for that in most cases.
Yeah.
Um, but if a person isn't, if you don't bring both feet in, you're not going to get the good results. So, then I encourage them to go ahead and go do what you believe in, what you feel good about.
I
Yeah.
love that approach.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Um, this is in concluding our interview, I'd like to do you have, I know you like to cook and you have a blog and you share recipes.
Mhm.
Do you have could you describe a favorite Ayurvedic meal of yours?
Whoa.
Something that's both nourishing and brings delight.
Hmm. Hmm.
I won't ask for it to be tridoshic, but
Oh, it's
if you.
always tridoshic. That's just it. It's that's all I do. Yeah, because that's how I keep my own doshas balanced.
Sure, sure.
But it's also what works. I've worked with it over the years with many different people and people coming and staying with me for a month at a time and that kind of thing. And I can tell you that it works and it works really well. Um, I, okay. So just as an example to um, moving away from this notion that it's Indian food, especially.
Sure.
Uh, a very nice thing to do is to make sushi. Yeah. Now, I don't eat fish, but one could.
Yeah.
But so you have rice, which is the augmenting part,
Mm-hmm.
and you have some nori, which is a sea vegetable, and that
Mm-hmm.
has a salty taste in it. That's very nice.
The
Yeah.
umami too.
Or wakame. And so let's say you would have that, and uh, you could make what they call unagiri, or it's a rice ball with the
Mm-hmm.
nori in it if you don't want to roll it up with some vegetables. But
Sure,
then you make it with some avocado, maybe a little asparagus or some cooked vegetables, just cooked lightly in spices.
sure,
And then you could have that with a cup of mung bean soup. Uh,
sure.
yeah, and have a nice lighter soup.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Beautiful.
so then you have your other part of the extractive, and then maybe I'd have some greens with it. Some sautéed, well, spinach even. Yeah, something like that.
That
Yeah,
sounds beautiful.
yeah, and carrots in this are really nice. Carrots in the sushi as well. But you can also, sometimes it's kind of fun if you take a big piece of nori, a whole sheet, and you could make some rice and some dal, kind of a little bit thicker dal, and you can just roll that up into the nori, and
That's
then you
beautiful.
have some veg,
So,
and then you have some zucchini with it, and some broccoli.
it sounds like very simple but very
Hmm.
delicious.
Yeah. And you're going to
Beautiful.
have food that adds to the body and food that cleanses the body. And you need a good
Yes.
balance of that in order
Yeah,
to
and
have good body.
you integrate that in your book using the word
Hmm.
augmenting,
Hmm.
and I think the other word you use is eliminating or
Extractive.
extracting,
Hmm.
augmenting and extracting.
Hmm.
Um, and you in your book you didn't necessarily encourage long periods of detoxification, but a continual period of
Hmm.
continually working with those principles of building
Hmm.
and
Imprint.
extracting.
Right.
So I think that's much more doable for people.
Hmm. Yeah. It's much gentler. It's much more doable with people's schedules. It works really well. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. So, well, thank you so much, Myra. Is there anything else you want to add about the programs that you're running now? What's happening online? Where you envision your business going?
Yeah. I think at Hale Pule, we have a really great team of people that we're here to support people in being able to have a better life, to live a better life, to feel better in life, and to do that using the tools of Ayurveda and yoga.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I know your website is halepule.com.
Right.
And are there other, I will include your other social media channels as well in the show notes and your blog and your
Okay.
books. Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much.